All right, let's get started with step one, where we'll be defining your unique context. Now, before we go into the details, I want to talk about how our process is based on the pioneering work of Alan Savory and the Savory Institute's Holistic Context Framework. I really believe that this is one of the most effective tools to create a foundational understanding of the purpose of a business or an organization. And I also highly recommend learning more about this and going in depth through the resources on their website or through a local Savory hub. There are many across Europe. I myself did my trainings with the 3LM hub in the UK. And what I'll go over now is a summary of what is an even more robust process, which you can explore at a later stage if you want to develop your context in more detail. So let's start by talking about what a unique context is and why it's so important to define. Very often when we get questions that come up about whether a product or a technique is going to work for someone out in the field, you'll hear people responding by saying, well, it depends on your context. But I also think a lot of people get confused and they think that their context is just your climate conditions or your location or maybe your soil type. But here we'll explore the essential information beyond just the simple statistics that you need in order to create your own unique context and then use that context to make practical decisions and evaluate options for real life situations. Now, for any team to work optimally, it's necessary for all of the members to understand and to align with the core motivations and the goals of the organization and what it's working towards. But what happens when motivations and goals are unclear? There's the classic conundrum of hourly workers and profit motivation. If you're working for an hourly wage, you're somewhat incentivized to draw out a task because you're getting paid for the time, whereas the owner or the manager might be paid based on the profit of what is completed. And so their motivation is to push you to work as fast as possible. So that's an example of when motivations are unclear or at odds with one another. Another example of a mismatched goal might be when a producer is motivated to create the highest quality produce with the most flavor and nutritional value, while the buyer might think that getting the highest yield and volume of produce is what they're looking for. So naturally, the management and the maintenance of the crop is going to look differently with those two motivations. On the flip side, what happens when these motivations are aligned, when they're working together? I've been lucky enough to work for a couple of companies and farms that make time regularly to check in with their team to understand how things are going on in the fields and with different tasks on the ground, while communicating the progress that's being made from an overview perspective, where the whole organization is on its way towards its goals and open to dialogue about how things could be improved and the problem solved. This really helped us to understand what they knew and what we had to do so that we could get to where we were trying to accomplish together. In the end, the real utility of putting together a unique context as we're about to do it is to orient anyone who is making decisions on the farm towards the shared vision and the goals of the organization, and to inform them of the resources available to them to move things forward. This is especially helpful in empowering everyone to take responsibility and confidently make decisions that are in interest of the whole team and which work towards a larger vision together. At the same time, this can create a form of checks and balances by evaluating the results of any decision as to whether they are bringing the team closer or further away from its vision for the future. A little later, we'll look at how your unique context can be used practically for these purposes, but first we have to get these ideas written down. So let's look at the 4 pillars of creating your context. The first one is to identify your decision makers and your resources. The second is to articulate your quality of life statement. The third is to write down or articulate your future resource base. And lastly, we'll be creating a statement of purpose to distill the most important things and make a clear communication of who we are and what we exist to do. So let's start by identifying decision makers and resources. And for this, we'll go into the worksheet, the PDF that accompanies this video. So scrolling down into the first page, you'll see a quick description of what we're going through and the different types of decision makers and influencers that we'll be talking about. The first are active decision makers. These are the people that must be involved with the decision-making process at some level or must be made aware when any important decision is made. Next, we have decision influencers. And these people are not directly involved in making decisions, but their opinions and their approval influences the choices of the decision makers. This could be your children, your customers, your clients, your suppliers, your neighbors, any number of people that your organization is reliant on. or whose opinion and feedback you value. And lastly, you have people who have the power of veto. These decision makers have the ability to override any decision made by the collective and must be consulted before final approval. So this might be the landowner if you don't own the land that you farm on. Maybe it's an agronomist who is in charge of a project and gets the final say. This might be the CEO of a company or the CFO, financial officer, or a board of directors, depending on how your organization is configured. Or it might just be you or your family members or whoever else is running or making final decisions for the organization. Here you can see in the profile on my own account in the Farm Health Report Card digital tool, in the first tab called Basic Farm Info, there's an area where you can input your decision makers. And in the case of my farm, it's quite simple. It's just myself and my partner Alba, who both also have power of veto. And we include our immediate family as those who are decision influencers, whose feedback and opinions we always weigh into account when we make important decisions on this farm. Once we've identified the people that we have to consider in our decisions, the next step of creating an understanding of your context is to gather essential information about your ecology and your business. Back in the digital tool under your profile, you'll find a number of different tabs on the left. We can go through information that will help to set the context and the statistics that will give us information on how the farm might be able to develop. So primary production, there's all the different types of livestock. You can put types and numbers here, as well as how much of your land is dedicated to things like arable crops or agroforestry, or perhaps market gardening or pasture and forage, and a space for other in case you're doing other things such as forestry or aquaculture, whatever that might be. For the landscape tab, we're looking at things like soil texture. And for any of these, if you don't have this information, there are links below to show you instructions on how to get this information. In my case, my soil is mostly sandy loam. The soil type is granitic sand. That's the base mineral on which the soil sits. The average topsoil depth from the different samples that I've done is around 15 centimeters. You can upload a recent soil analysis if you have one in PDF format, for example, and how much of your land is irrigated. In my case, I only have access to irrigation on about 3,000 square meters where we do the market garden and the tree nursery, and so I put 0.3 hectares here. Under business structure and resources, we've got the ownership structure, which in my case is just jointly owned by myself and my partner. If there's any buildings, which for us is just the farmhouse in the middle, any financial resources, you don't have to go into detail about quantities here if you don't want to. You can just put categories. So in my case, that's personal savings and occasional subsidies because we were able to get some subsidies last year. And for human resources, I kept it simple and just kept it to me and my partner, the two co-owners, with occasional help from family members, and made a list of some of the skills that we have to move our project forward. You can also list material resources below. So things like the cars or the machinery that you have access to. I put things like basic power tools, some of the inventory of materials and nursery stock and seeds that we have to start to plant out our system. Lastly, on the climate tab, there is some basic information that can help give context to the type of constraints that you have within your climate. The Köppen-Geiger category is one of the universal standards to measure your climate type. In my case, I am a CFB, or a Mediterranean cool summer where we live. And if you don't know how to find that, these links will help you to gather that information. The hardiness zone is 8A, and this is really a measurement of when the first frost dates of the year are and when the first frosts end, which determines the length of your growing season. The average annual rainfall where we are is about 750 millimeters over the last 30 years with large variations. I've seen statistics that say over 1,000 millimeters, and the last couple of years we haven't gotten more than about 400 millimeters, which is just a little over half of that. And then if you have access to average rainfall and temperature by month, you can either upload a picture or input the stats here. The longest recorded drought for us was actually the last 3 years, and the most rainfall recorded in 24 hours is not something that I've been able to find so far, but there are some helpful resources in case you don't have this information that might help you to find it. So that's mostly it for some of the hard statistics for your context. And there's so much more information that you can gather, but I don't want to make this overwhelming. So we'll focus on those as the important things to start with. And in the next video, we'll go into the process of articulating your quality of life statement, writing and articulating your future resource base, and then creating your statement of purpose. All of these will help to set a direction for where you will be going throughout this learning process.